Welcome to your analysis of Easter 1916 by W.B. Yeats. The context of the poem. Easter 1916 is set in the aftermath of the Easter Uprising. A small group of Irish nationalists led a rebellion to overthrow British rule, and they wanted to establish an independent Ireland. The protest was mainly taking place by the poets and the philosophers. But actually the rebellion was seen to be a failure and, as Yeats would put it, a casual comedy. But it would still go down in Irish history as a turning point. Irish public opinion changed from hostile towards the rebellion. At first they weren't in favour of the rebellion, but this changed when the British leaders executed some of those who had rebelled. And this then turned Irish opinion against Britain and in favour of the nationalists and those people who had started the rebellion. And Yeats' probably his most famous line in the poem is "Terrible beauty is born." Very basically, Easter 1916 gives Yeats' views of the rebels from the day before the rising and relates how these views changed afterwards. If we start with structure then, Yeats uses a mixture of the iambic tetrameter and trimeter. More basically, iambic tetrameter means that you have four sections, if you like, unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. So it would go da-dum, that class is one, da-dum, two, da-dum, da-dum, and then obviously you have four. Your trimeter is 3. So he slips between those 2 meters. He also includes the alternate rhyme of an AB scheme. Now, the first change from tetrameter to trimeter is probably evident when line 5 goes into line 6. I have passed with a nod of the head or polite meaningless words. So you go from your tetrameter, I have passed with a nod of the head, to your trimeter or pointless meaningless words. It is also, the trimeter is also present in lines 8, 11 and 15. And he is presenting the triviality of conformity and the change that developed in Ireland. And this change to trimeter presents the notion that Yeats likes to keep the superficial meetings with people nice and short. So particularly in stanza 1, which we're going to analyse in a moment. Trimeter is very important as well in line 15 when we get all changed utterly. Perhaps the superficial world presented earlier has become something more serious because it is now a world of war and death. A more simpler analysis could be, though, that the mixture of your meter and rhythm presents the speaker's own confusion about how he feels towards the uprising and those involved, because Yeats wasn't quite sure how he felt about it, and I think that's evident when he mixes up his meter. So I've just highlighted your more obvious instances of the trimeter there. You've got all pointless, polite meaningless words, repeated, to please a companion, all changed utterly, that is heaven's part, our part, and then the line from death, was it needless death after all? A little bit more on structure. In stanza 5, lines 60 and 67, use the iambic tetrameter, so that's your 4, da-dum, 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 to emphasise the sacrifice made by the leaders of the Easter Rebellion. And this rhyme scheme changes here, so this is important because your rhyme scheme from AB changes actually to stop at the word death. So child, wild is alternate rhyme, heart, part is alternate rhyme, but then we've just got death and it doesn't rhyme with anything and therefore it stands out more. Yeats is obviously placing emphasis upon this word, which links to what was said earlier, that the triviality of superficial meetings has changed into something associated with death, sacrifice and a change in Ireland. A little bit more on structure then, we have Volta. A lot of English teachers tend to disagree with that and say that Volta is only present in sonnets. I would disagree. A Volta is the changing point in a poem. So when the poem changes tone. Now, in my interpretation, I believe that that is at the line all changed utterly. Now, if you look very closely at that line, the comma is what we call the caesura. So please get your spelling of that right, because it's difficult. I've highlighted it in red. And caesura, if you didn't know, is a pause within the middle of a poetic line. So this is the changing point of the poem because it highlights how Ireland has changed before and after the rebellion. But Yeats further emphasises the change by not only repeating the word change, but using the caesura, and that provides extra emphasis because you read it as all changed, comma, changed utterly. Yeah. Now, your Volta is linked to the entire poem in the sense that Yeats uses it to outline the views of the rebels before the rising and the views afterward. So actually your Volta, whilst it signifies the change in Ireland, it also emphasises the change in attitude towards the British, and a change in terms of the views of those who rebel. So far we've got tetrameter, trimeter, alternate rhyme, Volta and caesura. And another quick aside for structure. The structure of Easter 1916 actually spells out the date the rebellion began, which was April the 24th, 1916. So you've got 16 lines in the first and the third stanza and 24 lines in the second and the fourth stanza. There are also 4 stanzas representing April the 4th. April being the 4th month of the year. So actually he uses structure in a more subtle way to really emphasise the date. And the date is the title as well, isn't it? I'll go to title and I'll come back to speaker. So the structure then, that subtle use of structure links to title because an Irish reader will instantly know the meaning and the poignancy of the poem because they'll know what happened exactly on that day. But by using this date, it also puts the Irish uprising into historical perspective because as a reader who's not from Ireland, we might research it or we might go and find out obviously what happened that day. There's also a bigger implication here because it's a reminder of Jesus because he was resurrected at Easter. And don't forget, in the grand scheme of things, Jesus died and he sacrificed himself for humanity and for humanity's sins. So again, you've got to be thinking about, is there a link there? Is he suggesting that the rebels, who we're going to find out about later, are in some ways synonymous with Jesus? Remember, in some ways, I'm not saying they are like Jesus, because they sacrificed themselves for a better Ireland and for an independent Ireland. So you might want to consider that. I'll just go back to speaker. The speaker is actually W.B. Yeats. He's not taking on a persona, it is him. And in that respect, there's almost an autobiographical tone because he's voicing his feelings towards something, if you like. Now, the poem was written in 1921, which is 5 years after the war. And he's trying to understand and figure out how he feels, but actually he can't. So all the way through the poem, as I said in your structure section, he appears confused about how he feels about the people who were killed and those arrested, and he mentions them in the poem. And as the poem finishes, he doesn't support the rebels and the uprising, but he does want the fighters to be remembered. Oh, apologies, I've made a typing error there. I've put what instead of want. So I'll say that again, sorry. The poem finishes and he doesn't particularly look like he's supporting the rebels, but he does expect them to be remembered. I've just done title. Okay then, stanza 1 we've got, I have met them at the close of the day, coming with vivid faces from counter or desk among grey 18th century houses. I have passed with a nod of the head, or polite meaningless words, or have lingered a while and said polite meaningless words, and thought before he had done of a mocking tale or jibe to please a companion around the fire at the club, being certain that they and I but lived where motley is worn, all changed utterly, a terrible beauty is born. So he begins by describing the vivid faces that he sees in everyday life, and the adjective vivid suggests that these people aren't important to him as individuals, but there is a bond, because if something is vivid, it's clear and you remember it. So whilst the individual people aren't important or remembered, as a collective they are. Because don't forget, they are his people. In line 6 and 8, he states that all he says to the people are pointless, meaningless words. Now that is repeated, so we want that as a means of repetition. And it's the fact that what he says to these people is always meaningless. And I suppose to some extent it suggests that these people are insignificant before the rebellion. Okay, so he has these interactions with these people, but as we get in the adjective meaningless, it doesn't mean anything. It's almost futile. And the subtle confusion is already hinted at when Yeats uses the word companion, because companion suggests actually that there is a bond with these people, but then later he refers to them with the pronoun they, which has a sound of something distant and a sense of detachment. So again, so we have a subtle instance of foreshadowing here, and it's the foreshadowing of his feelings towards these people. If you want to be more basic, you can use the personal pronoun I, which does shows it's him speaking, and it is his experiences and his thoughts. Still stanza 1, the close of day. So in line 1, when he says, I met them at the close of the day, there's a literal meaning here. It's the end of the day and the closing of the shops. However, you need to ask yourself, is he foreshadowing something in a metaphorical sense, as in death? Is he foreshadowing that the end of the rebellion will end with execution, will end with something ominous, and that links to the colour grey? Okay, again, it's something very dull. We have, under the surface of this stanza 1, we have something quite unsettling. Being certain that they and I but lived where motley is worn, and this implies that each citizen shares a common identity, that everybody perhaps dresses the same. Now, in a more detailed analysis, motley is the checkered outfit that a jester would wear. Now, a jester, we would know, is very similar to a clown, I suppose. It's to be mocked and laughed at, isn't it? And therefore, there's an undertone suggesting that any dream that they have are foolish and fanciful, and actually perhaps their dreams of independence should be mocked. Okay. Now the final line we know is massively important. A terrible beauty is born. This is an oxymoron in Terrible Beauty. It describes the people of Ireland. They come together and work towards independence from England, as we know. But he uses the oxymoron terrible beauty, and this provides us with definitive opposites which the war itself creates. So we've got the birth of these people being united, but it's actually described as being something terrible because, as we later know, the fight for independence causes death and execution. However, he also uses beauty. Yeats refers to this idea that the people who are uniting and the rebels who are standing up for their country, that this is the first time it's introduced, and he suggests it's something beautiful. And we call this basically repetition in poetry, but actually you can call it refrain as well, and because he uses it throughout. And whilst, remember, Yeats didn't particularly think it was beautiful himself, there's an implication that he's trying to convince himself and the reader, so us, that what these rebels did for Ireland was beautiful, whilst also holding something terrible about it. A terrible beauty is born. You've also got an instance of personification in that line as well. And an extra analysis, the plosive be, a terrible beauty is born, has that prolonged effect of that the rebellion was actually successful. Stanza 2. The woman's days were spent in ignorant goodwill, her nights in argument until her voice grew shrill. What voice more sweet than hers when young and beautiful she rode to harriers? This man had kept a school and rode our winged horse. This other his helper and friend was coming into his force, he might have won fame in the end. So sensitive his nature seemed, so daring and sweet his thought. This other man I had dreamed a drunken, vainglorious lout. He had done most bitter wrong to some who are near my heart, yet I number him in the song. He too has resigned his part in this casual comedy. He too has been changed in his turn, transformed utterly. A terrible beauty is born. Now in green I've put at the top there illusions. I'm going to discuss illusions for quite a period of time now because Yeats uses various people as illusions. We're going to do that now. I'm just going to go person by person to make it a bit easier. So in your red lines that I've highlighted at the top there, Yeats describes the leading figures in the rebellion and he uses them to highlight the irrelevance but the conformity as well that was presented within Irish society. Yeats presents Constance Margavix. I probably haven't said that right, apologies. So he is the first illusion we get, and he is a figure described, ignorant goodwill, her knight in argument until her voice grew shrill. Through his portrayal of this Constance Margavix, Yeats suggests that the dream of independence isn't a reality because people talked about rebellion before the uprising, but actually would always conform to English rule. So the imagery of this Constance Margavix arguing until her voice grew shrill, but maintains ignorant goodwill, shows us the deceptive nature of appearances. The use of shrill contrasts with the beauty she possessed when she was younger, and this idea when what voice more sweet than hers when young and beautiful. So shrill suggests that she is shouting and attempting to protest. However, ignorant goodwill will always conform to British rule. In the bottom yellow there, I've put freedom fighter who dedicated her life to ending British government in Ireland. With the new Irish government, Margavix held the position of Minister of Labour. Now, a quick aside just to give you a bit more information. In memory of Eva Booth and Con Margavix, it's a poem with 2 stanzas, actually by Yeats himself. And in this poem, Booth and Margavix are sisters. And Margavix dies in 1927 and Eva dies in 1926. Now, the young Yeats had been encouraged by them and entranced by their beauty, which we get, obviously, when he describes them as beautiful. And they are remembered in this poem as 2 girls in silk kimonos, both beautiful, one a gazelle. Both later become involved in the politics, and Constance was sentenced to death for her part in the uprising, although this was later commuted. Eva later became active in the women's suffrage movement. So in the poem, Yeats laments their loss, not only their physical beauty, but their spiritual beauty. This section here can be found as a quick description on Wikipedia if you need more detail. So that if we go back there, we've got this notion of this freedom fighter, this valiant woman who was initially sentenced to death as someone beautiful, and Yeats was transfixed by her beauty, and we get that in this description. And there's a sense of the fact that he admires her. The next person then is Patrick Pearse, and he is described in the red again. This man had kept a school and rode our winged horse. This other, his helper and friend, was coming into his force. So, Thomas McDonough, however you see it, is his helper and friend, which I'll do afterward. So Pearse and McDonough, I don't know how to say it, I apologise, were both members of the Gaelic League, and they were also involved in Ireland's fight for independence. Now, much like Constance Margavix, they are presented positively. It's another illusion, remember, but he shows the simplicity of their lives because they are writers and they are teachers, these 2 men. So it seems that any talent or skill that they have got is actually wasted, and we get that in the verb might when it says he might have won fame in the end. Obviously we know he didn't, so it's as if their ordinary lives have been perhaps wasted by this rebellion. as I say, is Yeats perhaps suggesting that their lives were more worthy if they remained as teachers and writers rather than fighters? So again, that's something you have to ask yourself. Again, I'm going to go into more detail now, but basically Patrick Pearse was an Irish writer, editor of the Gaelic League paper, and he founded St Edna's School in Dublin. Now, he is referred to in the poem, who had kept a school and rode our winged horse. Now, your winged horse is Pegasus, so actually there's another subtle allusion here. Pegasus is a figure from Greek mythology. It is the horse with wings. Pegasus flew Perseus to kill Medusa, and he would take heroes wherever they needed to go. In Greco-Roman poetry, he is referred to in his ascent to heaven after his birth. So we've got some link here. Zeus, king of the gods, instructed him to bring lightning and thunder from Olympus. So again, there's another link there, because that was supposed to be linked to mankind, the lightning and the thunder. Pegasus also allows any hero, really, but in this instance, a particular hero, to defeat the monster, the Chimera. However, the rider falls off his back trying to reach Mount Olympus. So what you've got then here is Patrick Pearse linked to Pegasus. And Pegasus is the symbolism of wisdom. And he is in Greek mythology, he's in Roman mythology, he's in the Middle Ages, he's in the Renaissance. He became a symbol in poetry as well. So he is the symbol of wisdom. So Patrick Pearse then is perhaps being called out for his wisdom here by Yeats, by suggesting he is a mythical creature. We have something that transcends time and transcends the ages, which I'll come to later, because remember, Yeats wants these fighters to be remembered, and if you are synonymous with Greek mythology and figures within Greek mythology, then you become remembered. If you want more detail or more links, you need to look at things like the fact that he is written about for his ascent to heaven. So is there a link there to Patrick Pearse? The fact that Zeus was the king of the gods, and Pegasus, was working alongside him. Is there a link there? That he was a means of transportation for heroes. Is there another link there for Patrick Pearse? Thomas, again, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce his surname. He studied Irish language and met Patrick Pearse through the Gaelic League. He joined the teaching staff at St Edna's School and again was involved in the fight for independence. If we move on now to Major John McBride, again, I've got you in red here. This other man I had dreamed, drunken, vainglorious lout. He had done most bitter wrong to some who are near my heart. So we have a more personal tone presented here. Now, John McBride was an Irish revolutionary and he was married to Maud Gonne. I'm going to mention her in a minute, and was executed. So he was actually executed after the uprising. Initially, he shows a kind of negativity and bitterness towards him because he said, a man who had done most bitter wrong to some who were near my heart. So there's your personal link here. Yeats implies a man in death is not the same to a man in life. So what you've done in your life is not the same as what people think of you when you die. I want to discuss that in a moment. And there's a link to another one of Yeats's poems here called An Irish Airman Foresees His Death. And he memorialises McBride as a heroic figure. Now, in the poem An Irish Airman Foresees His Death, you have an Irish airman who weighs up reasons for taking to the skies and fighting the enemy in World War I. The soldier in the poem actually accepts that he's going to die in the war, but he doesn't feel any sense of duty to the countries he's fighting for. So therefore he fights for his own village, which is in Ireland. So the question of national identity is important to the poem, but it also suggests an apathy or sympathy towards Britain, as you know, who were heavily involved in World War I. The soldier does not desire to fight on Britain's behalf, but actually is more impulsive. So again, these allusions, this link here is presenting John McBride as a fighter. He doesn't hold any loyalty to Britain. He is loyal to Ireland. And we have this idea that he fights based on impulse because national identity is important to him. We then need to ask ourselves, what did he do that hurt W.B. Yeats, which is here. So Yeats portrays John McBride as a vainglorious lout. He was an Irish revolutionary and the ex-husband of Maud Gonne. So we've got this, the fact that Yeats personally despises him, but he changes his opinion, doesn't he? Seeing he too has been changed in his turn. So we've got this idea that death can change things, and death has changed what Yeats thinks of McBride. So the dead McBride is a symbol and a hero, and it is therefore insignificant what he'd done when he was alive. Maud Gonne was a public role in the struggle for Irish independence as well. But her life actually held a private tragedy because her grief over a child who died at the age of 2 inspired W.B. Yeats to write a poem, which was unpublished. And she was so desperate to reincarnate the boy that she had sex in his tomb. She was an actress, an activist, a feminist. She was the muse and inspiration for Yeats, and he immortalised her in some verses. So again, John McBride linked to Maud Gonne here. If we go back up to the stanza, he had done most bitter wrong to some who were near my heart, which is obviously Maud Gonne. We have again 2 people that have stood up to the English, 2 people that he is memorialising in his poems as heroic. Again, if you need more information on Maud Gonne, you can type it in the internet, it'll definitely come up. But again, look, she was a huge role in the fight for independence as well. So basically, in this stanza, Yeats uses the figures as an allusion and a means of symbolism, implying that they should be remembered and respected for helping change Ireland. He presents them as idealised, perfect, and at times mythical. When I say that, we just need to look at the adjective beautiful, the adjective sweet, the adjective young. This idea of they could have been famous, the idea that so sensitive his nature seemed. And therefore it's this idea that they are flawless heroes. And again, they're almost mythical in the sense that he does compare Patrick Pearse to Pegasus from Greek mythology. Throughout the stanzas, the heroes shout to be heard. Look at that, a shrill shout. And they come into force and they sacrifice fame and they sacrifice their lives. And they are memorialised in death, regardless of their behaviour in life. So again, Yeats' opinion has changed. And we know that because he says, transformed utterly. And that line is extremely short, as you can see. And it shows us that regardless of what they have done, they are now remembered and should be remembered. It's almost as if Yeats is protesting that we need to remember them. And again, the stanza finishes with the refrain, a terrible beauty is born. If you want extra analysis, you have got sibilance throughout this stanza, again, which prolongs the memory of these people. So sensitive his nature seems, so daring and sweet his thought. Listen to the S's rolling up the tongue there. And again at the top. So until her voice grew shrill, what voice more sweet than hers? And your iambic tetrameter is massive here because that is very forceful. Now this stanza absolutely changes the poem because it changes focus from these allusions of symbolic heroes to nature. So we've got hearts with one purpose alone through summer and winter seem enchanted to a stone to trouble the living stream. The horse that comes from the road, the rider, the birds that range from cloud to tumbling cloud. Minute by minute they change. A shadow of cloud on the stream changes minute by minute. a horse who slides on the broom, and a horse plashes within it. The long-legged moor hens dive, and hens to moor cocks call. Minute by minute they live, the stones in the midst of all. Now, nature proves to be important because of the constant motion of the stream and the clouds. Now, the clouds are important here, and they become a symbol because the clouds change and they symbolize change. And we know that because he says change minute by minute. And he is reminding us that life goes on. And obviously, whilst life does go on, he wants this rebellion to be remembered for the change. Now, he shows this by using stone. Now, stone contrasts with cloud, excuse me. And because stone is again symbolic. However, stone is symbolic of something lifeless that stays the same. So where we had the cloud that was changing, we now have stone, lifeless and stays the same. It has no emotion. So if we look, though summer and winter seem enchanted to a stone to trouble the living stream. Notice your personification of living stream, which almost brings nature to like a romanticized life, doesn't it? Like a living thing. Now, there is another suggestion here that whilst he obviously mentions the clouds that change minute by minute, everything that has happened previously in the poem can't be changed. So this rebellion and the people that were executed and what they did cannot change. So therefore, what's happened in Easter 1916 is synonymous with this stone that he is describing, because the stone will forever be a stone, as the deaths of the people will always be the deaths of those people. Again, though, subtly is the suggestion that based on our experiences, our hearts and our souls can turn to stone. Can we be changed by the things we experience in life? So more naturally or more easily in this stanza, we've got nature and we've got natural imagery, and that almost contrasts with what actually happened in the rebellion. And nature remains idyllic and peaceful, and yes, it changes, but in many respects it stays the same. We've got the horse, we've got the bird, again, all of these natural images, minute by minute they live, the stones in the midst of all. Now notice that the stone ends the stanza, so Yeats is really emphasising the fact that the stone is symbolic of something that can't change, i.e. Easter 1916. Okay, moving on. Too long a sacrifice can make a stone of the heart, as I've just said, or when may it suffice that is heaven's part, our part, to murmur name upon name, as a mother names her child, when sleep at last has come on limbs that had run wild. What is it but nightfall? No, not night, but death. Was it needless death after all? For England may keep faith for all that is done and said. We know their dream, enough to know they dreamed and are dead. And what if excess of love bewildered them till they died? I write it out in a verse. McDonagh, McBride, Connolly, Pierce, and now in time to be, wherever green is worn, are changed utterly. A terrible beauty is born. Now this stanza then, it almost begins abruptly. Too long a sacrifice can make a stone of the heart, or when may it suffice. So again, this idea that a heart can become stone because it sacrificed something for too long a time, and that refers to war. War has caused the hearts of these people to change, and it has damaged them. It has damaged them spiritually, it has damaged them physically, it has damaged them in every sense of the word. And we get that rhetorical question, don't we? Or when may it suffice? And we get another rhetorical question in red, which I'm going to come to. Sleep then becomes a metaphor for death here, because we've got heaven, it's heaven's part, it's our part. Now notice we get the inclusive pronoun our here, as if it's a collective, as if we need to almost come together, or the Irish people need to come together to remember the heroes. to murmur name upon name. Again, look at that remembrance. As a mother names her child, when sleep at last has come. So there's your metaphor for death. On limbs that had run wild, past tense, as if someone has died. What is it but nightfall? Rhetorical question. In this instance, it isn't nightfall, as he says, no, not night, but death. Look at your alliteration there, no night, but death. And it's very forceful. The metaphor of death coming is forceful. And then he asks a huge question. Was it needless death after all? I can't answer that question for you. It's your interpretation. Was their death needless? Obviously not to the Irish people. But again, this rhetorical question highlights his confusion. He's still trying to decide whether this rebellion was worth it. For England may keep faith for all that is done and said, we know their dream. Again, look at your pronouns. We, that inclusive unity of Ireland versus their, which is detached, and we know their dream. And then you get your Shazera of the semicolon, we know their dream. Stop. Enough to know they dreamed and are dead. So that Shazera is powerful there. Again, look at your alliteration of the daydream, to know they dreamed and are dead. So again, needless death after all is linked here to they had a dream and actually they've died because of it, which links us back to the beginning when I suggested that any dream that these people had was almost unrealistic. And what if excessive love bewildered them till they died? Again, Yeats is asking questions here, which is showing us the confusion he feels. So they were so confused that they had so much love for Ireland and for their cause, that they've died. So we've got actually one of the first instances of emotive language here, because we've got heart, heaven, mother, dreams, love, died. So actually it does finish in a more powerful way to what he started with, because at the beginning we had that, as I said, that triviality and that superficiality, and now we have something a little bit more emotive and a little bit more poignant actually. And he finishes the poem with I write it out in a verse, and then he gives us the dash, so we do get a bit of a pause at the end of that line, and he lists McDonagh, McBride, Connolly and Pearse. And he memorialises them in the poem, and he memorialises the legacy that they left. Now and in time to be, and we have the present tense, so that shows us actually the present and the past tense now and in time to come. So the present and the past tense here are working to show us that they have lived on in memory. Wherever green is worn, well, we know that green is the colour of Ireland. Our changed utterly, a terrible beauty is born. So he finishes with the idea that the future of Ireland will forever be changed because of these martyrs. But also we've got the patriotic sense of the colour green. So wherever it is, it will carry these heroes with it. But also this idea metaphorically of something being green. It's something fertile. It's something hopeful. So basically, because of what these people have sacrificed, we have a hopeful future for Ireland. And we get our refrain again. Terrible beauty is born, and are changed utterly. So we've got that is a few meanings here. Changed and changed utterly is the lives of the people. It's Ireland's future. It's potentially as well Britain. It's his views. It's other people's views. And it's utterly there is very definitive. It's adverb if you need that for word class. And then we finish with our refrain and our oxymoron. A terrible beauty is born. So actually Yeats is still confused by the end of the poem, because he still thinks the rebellion was terrible because of the executions and the arrests and the deaths. But there's a suggestion there that there's something beautiful about this fight for independence. I hope this video was useful, and good luck with your analysis.